All right, welcome to the 86 Reason podcast by Over Easy Office as we dive in to the wonderful world of restaurants and all the insane and wonderful people that make this industry continue to move forward. And today I'm with a legend. And Bill, forgive me if I say this, but one of the kindest and most experienced people in our industry, both from the operations side all the way now to years in tech. And Bill, it's a pleasure to have you on. I'm super excited to learn more about your background. Where are you in the world right now?
I'm in Reno, Nevada, and thank you very much for the intro. You're both generous and kind.
Well, listen, I mean, you need no introduction, Bill. And, I think for a lot of people who may not know you beyond your tech years, you have spent tons of years in the thick of operations, and I feel like you've done all kinds of stuff. So, Bill, what was your first restaurant gig, and like how long ago was this? Where were you? Like, tell me about when you first caught the bug.
So I actually caught the bug before I worked in a restaurant. My grandfather came from Cyprus, and he and his brother ran a restaurant in Danville, Virginia, near the Dan River Mills. And my mom and her brother were raised upstairs. So there was this whole restaurant culture, which was interesting because just based on how things were done back then, she was not allowed in the kitchen where the men worked.
Whoa.
So my mom came out of a restaurant and never learned to cook. And she's gone now, so I can say this safely, never did learn to cook. She made a great hot dog. That was her favorite thing, was hot dog with chili and onions. But so I had all of this, we had visited family and they had restaurants. And so it was kind of part of the family lore. And I was living in Fayetteville, North Carolina in the early 1970s. And I finished high school. The short story is I thought I was going to college. My dad told me I had a fully paid for college education, and I found out that was called the GI Bill. Oh, and then all I had to do was survive Vietnam, and I would be going to college much like he did. So I decided to pivot.
Go into a different kind of war, right?
Yeah. And I said, I was interested in restaurants. I loved restaurants. I loved the whole idea. I had all kinds of, ideas of what it was like for my grandfather, who I never did get a chance to meet. So they were opening a new mall in town. This was 1974. And I applied wherever I could, but in particular, they were opening a Farrell's ice cream parlor. And for those that have not been to a Farrell's ice cream parlor, that is a whole thing all to itself. I could go on forever on that one. But I applied, and where you're supposed to put the job that you're applying for, I intentionally left it blank. And the guy that was interviewing me, I'll never forget, his name was Don Goody. I just thought, Goody at the ice cream parlor, this couldn't get more weird. He said, well, wait a minute, what job are you applying for? And I said, dude, I'm here for your job. And I just want to know where I get started. And he laughed and said, okay, well, you'll start in the Dishroom. And I said, perfect. Exactly where I want to be. I still say to this day, I went to the College of Dishroom Knowledge. Everything I needed to know about restaurants, I learned watching the food that was still on the plate and all those things that you learn over time about, how people behave in restaurants. So my strategy was that I would clear the dish room and then I would run to any other department and help.
Cool.
And I learned to cook. I was a surfer back then. My first business was making custom surfboards when I was in high school. I had Sea Shaft surfboards. So I had strong arms, and they found out that I could scoop ice cream when it wasn't tempered properly. And I jumped in there one day and I told this guy, get out of the way, you lightweight, let me in there. And I was like hurling scoops out of this really, really cold tub of ice cream. And so that's kind of how I got started. And so that was 1974. And the interesting part about it was that I got exposed to early technology. They brought in, Farrell's was owned by Marriott Corporation at the time. And Marriott was operating out of River Road. And so they had this machine. It was like a teletype that they installed in the office, this big honking machine with this little, what they called the boot. It was basically an analog modem, a coupler.
Whoa.
And so you would dial this number and you'd hear this crazy sound and slam the phone into this rubber boot. And all of a sudden, the count sheets would print.
No way.
1974 technology. And I called my friends and said, you guys got to come down here and watch this. And so it was kind of interesting, but for some reason, that was my first technology. And, here I am, 50 years later, still doing inventory count sheets, just not on a...
Bill, all right, hold on. So I was born in the 80s, so I'm trying to picture this. But so you're telling me you would essentially do like that version of a dial up, and then you would put it into a boot? What is this?
Yeah. So it's like this like a shoebox with holes on either side, and the phone fit in it. So it was form fit around the receiver and the microphone.
No.
And it would pause for a second, then all of a sudden, start these inventory count sheets, and we would go out and count the inventory, and then we would basically send it back. And they would then process our order, so the trucks would show up with the order on it based on the count that we entered. So we learned to count accurately or run out.
Oh my gosh. And then who's doing the orders? Like somebody just in like some central office?
Yeah, it was all coming. At the time, it was River Road. I'm not sure if they're still on River Road, but we used to just call it River Road. They would process the order, and the truck would pull up on a Friday morning from Martin Brower, I think it was, and in comes the stock. And so I got very involved in that. I got really excited about it, and I wanted to know more about how the place operated. So that's where I really got started. And the real punchline on Farrell's is about 6 months later, they started opening new restaurants. And they brought in this new cash register from NCR. It was an NCR 250.
Wow.
It was the first electronic with buttons on it. When we first opened, it was, chum, chum, boom, chum, chum, boom. Now it's like, each individual item. So I learned how to operate the cash register, and they asked me, would you be interested in going on the road and opening new restaurants and training people how to do the inventory counts and to run the cash register and ring them out and fill out the deposit slips and all that kind of stuff. So I did, and 6 months later, I was in my little yellow Volkswagen on my way to Macon, Georgia, to open my first restaurant. And I did that for about a year and a half.
And how many restaurants did you get to open, Bill?
There were 1, 2, 3, 5 total that I was involved in. It was the greatest job in the world and the greatest education. The first one we opened, I said, well, where's the procedure? Do we have some kind of instructions? No, we're kind of making it up as we go along. I wrote down everything that I did and everything everybody else did. And at the end of that first opening, handwritten, I handed over to this regional person that was there for the grand opening and said, look, the next time we do this, could you get somebody to just type this up? Because This is what it takes to get it done. So they created a job for me called crew chief. And so I was the lead guy for all the new openings after that first one. So I kind of never looked back.
So Bill, going into this, did you ever think when you first started that this would be a career, or were you just trying to figure it out as you went?
No, I was in for the long haul.
Okay.
In fact, I tried to stay with Marriott. I won't give you all the details, but what really broke the deal with Marriott is they told me that if I wanted to move up the chain, I would have to go to college. And I said, I'm already doing the job. I'm already doing it better than the other people that you have. Why would I waste time and money going to school to learn something I clearly already know how to do?
Right.
And so I left and moved to Las Vegas.
And let me ask you, Bill. So, I mean, what's your family, like your dad, for example? What's his response to you being in restaurants? Because I got to imagine back then it's not glamorous. There's no TV shows about restaurants. It's like it's a working class job. I mean, like, how are they
Yeah.
responding?
So I come from a military family.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, my dad was in the Air Force. My mom was in the Air Force.
Wow.
My brother, when he came of age, went into the Navy, and I went into restaurants. It was during the Vietnam War. I'll leave it there.
Yeah.
I was right at the end where the draft ended. So, right after the draft ended, I was a little late, but I signed up.
Did you have
So
inside
I was
info?
not a popular family member.
I see.
My mom thought it was great that I was in restaurants, but she thought I would outgrow it at some point. But I went to 5 high schools, Xavier.
Just from
so
moving around and stuff?
Well, moving around, I got kicked out of one. I was president of my class at the other. So I've got a whole long story there I could tell. But the bottom line is my parents were transferred to Las Vegas at Nellis. And I hadn't seen them in about a year. And I flew out on vacation to visit my folks. I took one look up and down the Las Vegas Strip in 1977 and said, what am I doing working in an ice cream parlor? Am I out of my mind? This is the land of milk and honey. So I went home. Now, I mentioned I had started out making surfboards. I had worked at a local concert venue. I had done theater, and I was in restaurants. I never had real vacation of any kind other than a few days here and there. So I took all the money that I had saved, and I took the year off.
Wow.
And I partied like it was 1978. And when I ran out of cash, I loaded up my car and my surfboards and my stereo and moved to Las Vegas. So that's how I ended up in it. I've been in Nevada ever since.
Bill, and I mean, I can only imagine what Vegas was like then. And, I want to, we'll continue, we'll get back to the story of Vegas, but when you land there now, I mean, is it just utter shock and awe, just what that city's become and how it's become such a mecca for entertainment and food and beverage and all things, consumerism?
It's weird. It really is. Yeah. When I go to Las Vegas, I still see what used to be there. I landed in Las Vegas, and right where Caesar's Palace was like the end of the world. If you tried to cross from there were railroad tracks on Spring Mountain, which is also desert in. And when the railroad cars came through, everybody was late for work. I mean, it was just a tiny little town. I got to tell you, it was charming. It was exciting. I had the greatest time of my life. But I was so shocked when I landed in town, and I'm the restaurant guy, and nobody would hire me. I was like, I'm here. I'm the guy. I mean, I've been at this for like 3 years. I mean,
and what was the landscape of restaurants back then like? I mean, were comps a thing?
Oh yeah.
Like what were the big players in town back then?
So the big players were Caesar's Palace, but there were back it up. Downtown was still pretty much the spot. The Strip was just starting to happen. There were places like the Silver Slipper where you could go for breakfast, and for $2 you could have steak and eggs. So it was all the restaurants were run by the casino itself.
Okay.
There were no leased restaurants. There were no celebrity chefs of any kind. And food was the marketing agent. It was all about cost of acquisition back then.
Got it.
And I was so shocked that I couldn't find a job, and I had run out of money, and I didn't want to stay with my parents.
Yeah.
So I decided the people that seemed to have the dough were the casino dealers, and particularly the crap dealers. And I started talking to people, and I'm looking at this jewelry that they're wearing. And what do you do? I deal craps. What do you do? I deal craps.
Interesting.
And I'm good with math. So I became a crap dealer.
Get out.
And I dealt craps for almost 3 years and saved every penny I could save in cash. You couldn't put it in the bank; you'd have to pay taxes on it. Hopefully, the statute of limitations run out on that one. But I dealt craps, and I had a very, very illustrious career on the dice table. Met celebrities, had fun like you can't believe. The Imperial Palace is now, I think they call it the Quattro or the Quad or something. It's across from Caesars.
Okay.
I opened that place in, I think it was 1979, dealing craps on the graveyard shift. And, across the street, it was like Larry Holmes and Sugar Ray Leonard fighting in the parking lot. And
Wow.
We're going home with like $1,500 in cash tips at the end of the night.
From one night?
One night. And there was a big extra board, so we would cash in on a big event and then just basically call out for 2 or 3 days. There were plenty of people that wanted to work for us and go spend all of our money and come back. What? So I did that a couple of times, but I knew that I had to get back to restaurants. And all the guys that I worked with were like, you're making 6 figures in cash. Why would you ever go back to restaurants? And I said, because I don't want to end up being one of these angry humps like you that basically can't wait to talk trash about everybody that came through the door and what degenerates they are. Said, I like people. That's why I think I enjoy restaurants as much as I do. So I did it until such times I had enough cash to live for like 3 years because, if you go into the restaurants, you need 3 years worth of money just to maintain your lifestyle. But interesting transition. Here's a good one for you. I took a job selling dish soap and repairing dish machines for a local company called Total Systems. They had a great deal. They charged the casinos. They beat out Eco Labs and Du Bois at the time. Those were the 2 big players. They beat them out because the deal was we'll charge you like 2 cents a cover.
Okay.
So once a month, you would collect the cover counts, and that's what they paid for all of the service and the chemicals and everything that went into the machines. So the company that was doing it had a vested interest in making sure those machines were tuned up and working properly. So I lied a little bit and said, I can fix them if they break. I mean, if the corn gets stuck in the jet or something, how bad could it be? So there I was with a tool bag in and out of every kitchen in Las Vegas. I met all the stewards. I met the chef. I met the food and beverage team. I asked the employees, what's it like to work here? And I started meeting people. And I was out on Boulder Highway at a place that had just opened called Sam's Town that's famous today. And they had a food and beverage guy there that was young like me. I think he's 2 years older than I am, named Bob Bodner.
No way.
And I met Bob. He was opening an ice cream parlor in a casino, Xavier. And I'm like, dude, if you need help with ice cream,
I got the guns.
And he said, oh, you are? Well, where did you work? And I told him. So he reaches into a file and pulls out a Farrell's menu and opens it up and says, all right, well, what goes into this? And he started quizzing me on the menu. And I was answering all the questions. I knew that stuff backwards and forwards. And so that's how Bob and I met. And interestingly, at the same time, I was also selling life insurance. A buddy of mine got a license to sell whole life insurance, and he was making some great money. And I said, well, what do you have to do to get into this? And he said, well, you got to be licensed. And I said, well, how do I get licensed? You got to pass this test. And I said, okay, but when do they give the test and how much does it cost? And I found out there was going to be a test on Saturday at UNLV. And I showed up with like $50. I took the test, see what happens, and I passed. So I'm selling life insurance at night, and I'm doing dish machine repairs and selling dish soap during the day. So I sat down with Bob and I said, Bob, what have you done to plan for your future? Now you know who I'm talking about because eventually Bob
Why don't you, for the world at large, explain who Bob Bogner is, because he's an icon in the industry, but many may not know who he is.
The most influential, pivotal person in my life and career is Bob Bogner to this day. We met, he was still going to school at UNLV. And his job was to build all the new restaurants. And after we did this ice cream parlor thing together, my job was to build all the restaurants, and Bob moved up the food chain. We were at Boyd Gaming Corporation. We did a number of projects together. We built Gold River in Laughlin back in around 1984, I believe. Ground up casino. I was 28, Bob was 30, and we're building a casino. We took over the Stardust and the Fremont. If you ever saw the movie Casino, we were the team that took over when they locked up Lucky Lefty Rosenthal and Tony Viance-Spilatro. That's a whole nother story.
Woo.
But Bob went on to do great things. Maybe the pinnacle of his career was he created, designed, and opened and ran the Borgata in Atlantic City, which I know I found out later you worked there.
Yep.
But Bob, he's semi-retired. I haven't talked to him since, it's been a number of years now. But one of the greatest guys ever. And I'll tell you this much about Bob. When I went to work at Sam's Town, Bob had an inventory system that he was putting together on a System 36. There were no PCs, so it was mid-range computers. And that system, I kind of inherited it when Bob moved up the food chain. So I took it to the next level, which was to get down into the nitty-gritty of central purchasing. We built a system where we had a central purchasing office that was on a 36 that would get 3 bids on every product that we purchased, whether it was dice or carrots. And they would push these bids down through leased phone lines to the individual. We had 5 casinos at the time. And then you could go in and purchase from any of those 3 vendors, but you had to buy from one of the 3 approved vendors. And the strategy was, then we monitored who was paying too much for green beans and said, you're paying $6,000 a year more for green beans than the Stardust. Nobody complains there. Maybe you should try their green beans. And we kind of turned the screws and began to tighten down overall costs. But the interesting point about that one was we needed somebody to write the code. And there was no inventory software. There was nobody out there doing this. I knew exactly how I wanted it to work. And so we hired a company that did gaming software. Okay. They wrote, fill slips and drops and credit and markers and all the stuff that makes a casino tick. And the owner of that company took the project personally because it sounded like it was going to be something really innovative. And we produced that central purchasing system. And the owner of that company is now my wife, Deb, and that's where I met her.
Must mean you were good to work with.
Well, I like to say that I got everything I wanted, and the software was pretty good.
Bill, so back then, and I mean, I can't imagine how much things have changed, but like how long back then is it taking to build a piece of like a feature set, or how do you test it back then? And like, I mean, again, I can only imagine how things have changed, but back then, like, how are you ensuring there aren't bugs and stuff in the code and stuff when you're trying to roll out a custom software?
Well, we know how to cook, but we didn't know how to code. Right. So we coded like we cooked. It was like you would make one little feature and taste test it and go, it's a little bitter, we need to tweak this. So we were doing it with live data. It was literally like, all right, create a purchase order. Oh my God, it didn't line up. We need to move this around and try it again. There was a lot of that iterative, like, try it and see what happens kind of stuff. But I will say this, rock solid. The code that Deb and her, Deb was a contractor there, which was a whole nother adventure. Nobody could know that we were seeing each other, so we were on the down low because I was the client.
When did Bob ever find out about this? And when did you come clean? When did you come clean?
It was at the wedding of the director of IT, Jim Rice. Shout out to Jim. We lost Jim just earlier this year. But Jim was getting married, and Deb and we had already put the product out, and it was up and running. And we showed up together at the wedding, and Bob was like, "You too?" It's like, yeah.
That's
but
awesome.
Bob and I, during those years, we had so much involvement with each other. We were in Laughlin together, which the first homes built in Laughlin, Nevada, we owned. The guy who built the homes owned the land that the casino was on, where we built Gold River. So while we were in the process of constructing Gold River, they called us in and said, well, look, here's where all the homes are going to go. There's 4 models. Pick a home, pick a lot. We'll build it there for you. And I'm pretty sure I paid like $85,000 or something for that home. It was under $100,000.
Yeah.
Literally, they built the home, Xavier, and I moved into it. I had to put a big satellite dish on the roof so I could get television because there was no cable or anything down there. Antennas aren't going to work. And I got it all wired up finally, and Mr. Boyd called me into a meeting and said, things have gone to hell back at Samstown. I need you in Las Vegas. I said, man, I just finished moving into my house. He said, don't worry about it. We'll make that good for you. But can you be there on Monday? And this was it was like 3 days later. So, yeah, those were the times.
Let me tell you, let me ask you, Bill. So, I mean, even just that example goes to show how crazy this industry can be and how it's beyond a career. It's a lifestyle. Were there multiple times throughout this experience, did you ever consider going back to craps? Did you ever, no? You just loved
Never.
It was your thing? Like never a question?
The only reason that I'm not still running restaurants today in Las Vegas, well, 2 reasons. The first one is after we hit 5 casinos, the company kind of said, we're going to sit tight for a while and, shore up what we've built. Took over the Stardust and the Fremont, and that was a whole other thing. And so we were building new restaurants, which was what I really love to do. I always say I'm not a maintenance guy.
Yeah.
I got to be out front, trying to hoe a new row. But the other thing is I had a physical issue. I had a spinal problem that came up that made it, let's just say I was scared to death if I were to fall in the kitchen that I may not get up. And I was standing in the kitchen after I got back to work after surgery, and I was just sweating.
Oof.
And it was like, man, I can't do this anymore. I can't. I got to get out of here. So, after my surgery, I had spinal surgery, and I had a recovery period that lasted, quite a while. And I told my now wife, my girlfriend at the time, I said, go buy some books for me on how to program. They've got PCs now. I'm pretty sure I get the company to buy me a PC. So she brought me some books on DBase and Fox Pro. And so I'm laying there and I'm reading how to write code in the language of the day. And when I was healthy enough to go back to work, they did buy me a computer. I actually wrote a couple of applications, just enough to where I was really kind of getting into it. And so right in the middle of all of this, NCR released a new POS platform called the 2760. Now, I put the first 2160 in a casino, and if you don't remember the 2160, and most people don't, there was a single cable that came out the back. It was an async cable, and that's how it plugged into a wall data box and would do room charges. So now, instead of running to the front desk with the paper and the checks and putting them in, we could charge post to the front desk. And so we put in this 2160. Well, when we opened Gold River, we were running out of capital, and we needed a property management system, and NCR had one that would run on that same box. And so I said, look, we'll test it for you, but you can't charge us for it because nobody's ever used it before. But in return, I'll put the 2160s in. So we made a deal with NCR. So I had friends there. Well, when the 2760 came out, they called me up and said, would you be willing to put this in one of the casinos and giving it an early adopter try? So I negotiated a deal because we were finishing up some new restaurants. I'm going to take all my old 2160s, send them over to the El Dorado Casino in Henderson to save them some budget money, and I'll get the brand new 2760s. Well, one of the problems with the 2760s were that there were no reports. In order to get reports, you got them from a third-party company called REMAX. REMACS, Restaurant Management Control Systems. So I was introduced to a guy named Dave Douglas, who's one of my partners today in COGS-Well.
Wow.
In fact, my other two partners ran development and customer service, training, implementation, all that kind of stuff. So all of a sudden we met under these circumstances, and I started writing custom reports using the REMAX report writer. And they were telling me all about this inventory product that they had put on a PC for restaurants that was written in BASIC. And of course, I had this I had people flying in from IBM to see how we were running operations through the System 36. So I kind of already had a name for doing this sort of thing. So REMAX had signed a contract with Hilton Gaming, and Hilton Gaming wanted them to write on the PC something like what I had running on the System 36. Now, the guys at REMAX, they knew restaurants, they didn't know casinos, and it's a completely different model. Well, the guy in IT that was in charge of the project used to be my NCR systems engineer. And he said, if we're going to do this, we need to get this guy.
Mm-hmm.
So all that happened about the time that I was standing in the kitchen after surgery, sweating, thinking, I don't think I can stay in the restaurant and risk a fall. So that's how I made the leap, and it was tough. I had to sit down with Bob and just say, I'm going to move on, and I got to do something different. I don't think I can stay. Not only that, but where was I going to go? The next move for me would be like an assistant general manager of a casino.
Yeah.
And I remember talking to Deb, my now wife, at the time we were having dinner. She said, so, what's next for you? And I said, well, as soon as we get another casino, I'm in line to be an assistant GM potentially. And she looked at me, she said, really? Is that what you want to do with your life? And it was like, wham. I had never stopped long enough to question the path that I was on. And I said, that's an interesting question. Never thought about it, but maybe it's not. Maybe I don't want to be in casino operations for the rest of my life. So anyway, I stayed. I like to say I stayed in the restaurant industry. I just got to take the weekends off.
Oh, well, I mean, it's Bill, when you're doing these old counts back then, are you helping lead a team that was actually execute them, or were you in there? Because to me, look, I mean, God bless you, Bill. I often say that if something like COGS-Well was available to me back when I was an operator, I may not have a reason to either build Shoebox or Over Easy, but it was my least favorite part of being in operations because one, I'm type A, and two, I feel like if you're going to do something, do it right. Even if it's cleaning plates, just make sure you wipe the bottom, you dry them, the whole deal, right? And counting inventory became this self-inflicted, painful thing when, new vintage of wine, I got to update the sheet, I'm doing all these notes, and it becomes a never-ending rabbit hole because, at least beverage is in a box or it's usually full bottles, and then, whatever, it's not perishable. But when you start getting into food and, how does asparagus compact, and you start going nuts. And so how many times what was your involvement, let me say, with these counts? Like how deeply involved were you?
Well, I was there. I was in the middle of it. I'd come in and in the casino industry, the restaurants don't do the inventory. The accounting department does the inventory. You're being audited by a third party.
Which is the way it should be.
Yeah, the job of the restaurant staff is to say, no, that's a strip loin, not a 109 rib. So you identify the product. Um, but it's interesting. It's not as challenging as payroll, and nobody ever questions doing payroll.
Well,
Um,
right. Well, and it's funny. The payroll, you need people to make a restaurant run, right? But I think it's often the idea that you don't necessarily need a great count. You know what I mean? But it's just one of those things. For me, it was painful because I was bad at sitting still in school, and to me, the inventory was always the ultimate. It was the ultimate exercise in patience, because to do it right,
yeah,
you really have to make sure. And without the tools, of course, you're also just. So Bill, back, and maybe this will surprise you. Back in the Borgata days, we used to get a printout of all the things that we had ever purchased, not just for a certain period or whatever. And for me in the wine program, we're going against a SKU that was built in what was it called? It was called Stratton Warren. So we would get this Stratton Warren printout with like the dot matrix and the holes on the side, and I'm going through the wine storage, and so I'm like, all right, first wine, it's Flowers Pinot Noir, all right, and I'm flipping through pages. Here's Flowers. All right. And then the next wine, Robert Sinsky Pinot Noir. And, and then I'm like, not the Carneros one. It's the Russian. And it was painstaking.
it was. Well, I'll tell you this much. I tried to convince Bob to let me compete in Borgata.
Oh, man.
And he was like, no, it's a much different thing than you're used to. And it's like, no, actually, if anybody knows how to do this, it's me.
True.
And they went with Stratton Warren. But I'll tell you a short Stratton Warren story. When I started my career at Remax, I had an office at the Las Vegas Hilton back in the purchasing department. I had a desk in a corner, basically. And it was literally run the purchase order and then call the programmer in Sterling, Virginia and say, okay, change this, change that, change the other thing. And then he would buzz me back and say, okay, it's on the BBS. And I would log in with Carbon Copy and download the EXE and copy it onto the server. And then we would run that same thing again. And it's like, that's close, but we need a little bit more tweak.
Wow.
So we were building it while we were using it at Las Vegas Hilton. Well, it was very successful. And that was a great product. I still say there are a few products out there today that come close to the functionality that we had. We called it cost control.
Okay.
It wasn't the same product that Remax was selling to restaurants. It was different platform, different technology, different database. Got that thing up and running at Hilton, and got a call from a friend of mine saying, we're opening the Excalibur, which at the time was the biggest hotel in the world.
Whoa.
And he said, can you help us? We need inventory, and I understand it's going well at Hilton. So I put it into the Excalibur, and he said, by the way, he said, do you still write custom reports on the NCR 2760? And I said, sure. And he said, will you build me an audit? Now, he was the CFO, and he said, here's the thing. He said, this stuff always just landed on my desk. I got no idea how they do it.
Got it.
So if you could just build it and give me what you know I need. So I personally did the whole implementation at Excalibur, including pulling all the points. There were 6 different POS servers on 6 different floors of the building. So let me explain this one to you. This is interesting. There was no digital switching back then. There was hardware. So through the phone lines, we installed short haul modems. It's like a little box, and there's 4 wires, and you would flip number 2 and number 3, because one was send and one was receive, so that on the other end, it was receive and send. You follow?
Yeah.
So here we've got these things, and then there's a code switch, and the code switch would switch between 6 channels, and then they would go out and they would hit a fallback switch, because remember, there's only 1 wire coming out of the point of sale. So it was normally a charge post to the front desk, but whenever I would send a hexadecimal arming code, it would switch. and let me grab all the numbers, and then it would fall back. They called it a fallback switch. So it was all hardware pulling all this data, but it took about 45 minutes, but all of a sudden the printer would just take off, and on one page I had all the numbers from every bar and restaurant in the building in an auditable format. That and the inventory and the recipe systems. So at that point in my career, in order to sell cost control, I'd have to convince the casino to put in a token ring network and, network cards and buy PCs. So it was a whole thing.
It sounds like it. And it's like in your, see, I feel like we have it easy now, and not that we do, because it's very hard to sell what we sell or to service our industry. But with all that said, you're not asking them to install hardware, change their network, all that stuff. I can only imagine what it was like back then. But, interestingly enough, Bill, I feel like you hit it nail on the head. Casinos in that industry are so much different than the restaurant industry in the infrastructure of how things come through. And
yeah,
and so many people know you from your days at Compete. And interestingly enough, when your name comes up, so many people say, "Oh yeah, I know Bill from back in his Compete days," and you really made a name for yourself. So I wonder, when you made the switch and you finally are out of the gaming industry on a day-to-day basis, and you're now working in Compete, and you're part of that team that's kind of like the founding team to get this thing up and rolling, how much did you have to change your approach now from selling, like these corporate enterprise entities that have all different kinds of layers to what they're reporting on, to now a very focused restaurant kind of style?
Yeah, it was a huge, huge adjustment. And I'll tell you, the other part of it was, now I'm selling accounting, and I'm payroll, and I'm selling all of the, accounts payable, accounts receivable, bank reconciliation. So, today at COGS-Well, the average demo is about an hour with questions.
Okay.
At Compete, it was more like 4 hours.
Whoa.
It was like, okay, bring in the accounting team. I'll go an hour with them. I'll go an hour with the payroll team. And that leaves us 2 hours for all the operations stuff. And then they would bring everybody back in for questions. I had one demo. The longest one I ever did was a day and a half. I flew into town. Yeah, I called it Stump the Chump. Literally went in at 9 o'clock in the morning in person and started a demonstration that broke for lunch. I thought I was going home the next morning, but halfway through the afternoon, they said, "Can you stay and come back tomorrow? Because we have other people that aren't here that have questions." So it was like a day and a half demo. Closed the deal. So, that part was worth it.
Yeah.
But it was very, very difficult. And it was hard to manage success because there's so many different customers in the same company. The CFO, the controller, the paymaster, the inventory people. Compete was very, very challenging, which really kind of limited our ability to scale. It's one of the reasons why I got out of that whole all-in-one concept. It's not a smart business model. There comes a point where you need an army of salespeople to each talk about the one thing that they understand out of the overall things. Mm-hmm. As soon as you start doing that tag team, it's like, pro wrestling, you're tagging in and out different people. Customers, I think, get a little nervous.
Sure.
And it's like, so when I call support, if I have a question about payroll and a question about accounts payable, do I have to make 2 phone calls? Can't I just talk to somebody that can help me with both? Can you transfer me? And so it was a different model. And I think that part of the reason that I was successful at Compete was that I could speak to everything from, accounting, inventory, payroll, commissary, go ahead and break.
Hexacoaxle.
Yeah, but then when it came time to start bringing in salespeople, it was very, very difficult.
Yeah.
When the private equity people came in to compete, I was in a meeting and they're saying, we're not scaling quickly enough. And I go, we're growing like, 80 to 100% year over year. And they said, well, that's not fast enough. And I said, well, sorry, what magic do you
Propose.
intend doing? And I'll never forget this guy. He looked me dead in the eye and says, we're going to hire like 20 of you. And I said, there aren't 20 of me. You're going to find that out the hard way. There's one of me. And I'll be happy to help you. But do you know, we used to call it the IBM pregnant lady theory. Do you know that one?
No.
Back in the 70s, somebody at IBM made I credit them. I don't know if that's true or not, but 9 women cannot produce a baby in 1 month.
Right. Understood.
It just doesn't work. You can't scale that way. It takes time. And so what my strategy was that I took salespeople off the help desk.
Got it.
And this is a good strategy for you to consider. If you've got somebody that's good with customers that are angry and upset because something isn't working properly, and they can not only talk them down, but help them, and people say nice things like, wow, I was in real trouble and this guy in the help desk bailed me out. That's my next sales guy.
Interesting.
That's somebody or woman. That's the person that can make the leap from tactical support to a strategic sales role if they can do that.
Interesting. Bill, so how many years did you work at Compete?
Well, I was their biggest customer for the first 3 years. I was a consultant for Dave & Buster's. And interestingly, Dave & Buster's bought the source code to my Remax product when I left. So they were still running Remax on DOS at Y2K. And they brought me in and said, okay, we got to get through the Y2K thing for one, but after that, we need to replace it. And that's when we found Compete. And the inventory was really bad. And the deal that we made with Harry Barketing, the founder of Compete, was that we would roll it out. At the time, it was like 45 Dave & Buster's. But in return, they would let me redesign the inventory and recipe part. So we rolled it out. We got going on the redesign. We made the upgrade. And then I went to work for Compete as vice president of sales. So that was like 2005. Yeah, I'd started around 2002. So
got it.
I was like 17 years involved with Compete, all in all, before finally it was time to move on and start COGS-Well.
And so, Bill, you've seen it all at this point, and you brought up an interesting point about private equity and VC. And, for good or bad, it obviously has an effect on how a company runs. And there's plenty of success stories, but I think there's a lot more challenges that people don't often think about. What, in your decision to start COGS-Well, what were some of the what kind of experiences did you have and see, like that, IBM pregnant lady thing? What kind of experiences did you go through that really informed your decision with your partners not to raise money?
After the sale of Compete, we were all kind of like, now what? We're going to play golf.
Yeah.
What are we going to do?
Surf.
And I was doing advisory work for Bavuk at Plate IQ at the time. And I'm looking at all the data that they're scraping off of these invoices thinking, wow, this is something really, really special. And so we all had a conversation. And 2 of my partners, Mike Brown and Glenn Nelson, have a little lunch and breakfast spot called Jake's in Livermore. And they signed up for Plate IQ and started looking at all the data. And we sat down with Bavuk and said, can you stand up an API so that we could pull all of that receiving data? And he did. And, my first advice to Bavuk was, stay in your lane with AP automation. Don't try to be an inventory system because you have no idea what you're getting into. It's a hairball at best. And so we collectively decided to start COGS-Well because Mike Brown, who's the lead developer at the time, the only developer, he looked at the data and said, "Yeah, I can work with this." So, had he not been able to actually take that data and run with it, Glenn had a lot to do with organizing the system. Dave and I were really focused more on the marketing side, and we all expected to have to put some money into it. We just thought that was, at some point we're going to have to write a check.
Yeah.
And once the software was ready for the public, and Mike and Glenn said, "Okay, we're ready for customers," I still say that the pinnacle of my career was I picked up the phone and called 3 people and said, "I got something new. You're going to be the first. I'll make it financially attractive to you, but would you be willing to give it a try?" And they all said yes.
Amazing.
And we were cash positive pretty much from the start. We were all ready to have to write a check. I will say this, the big launch was going to be on April 1st, April Fool's Day, 2020. That's when all the non-compete, non-solicit from the 2015 sale of Compete wore off. And that's in the middle of the lockdown. So we like to say we were emancipated during the lockdown. Oof. So it kind of delayed our plans for a couple of months, but hey, we weren't getting paid anyway. So what's the difference, right?
Bill, amazing. So listen, there's a lot I want to dive into with you about, what it's like to be in sales, what it's like to sell restaurants, challenges you see coming up, how AI may or may not affect restaurants and operations. And I feel like this is part 1 of a 2-part series for us, because you're a wealth of knowledge, but I also feel like you are incredibly honest, open, and vulnerable about your experience. And I think this is just the beginning, because I want to dive into all kinds of stuff specific to your experience with COGS-Well. So why don't we put a pin here? We'll do a part 2 if you're cool with that. And
love to. Thank you. I certainly would. I mean, I always wonder, I tell my wife, I said, I do these podcasts. I wonder, will anybody, A, listen to this, and B, say, this guy, we've heard this story before or something. So thank you for the opportunity. I'm
Bill,
very appreciative.
You're the best, and I always look forward to seeing you. And more importantly, I think you have a lot to teach people in the industry, especially now that there's a lower barrier of entry for restaurant tech professionals and for former operators. I think you got a lot that you can share that will help hopefully guide, even if it's one person in the future, or myself. So where can people find you, Bill, just in case they want to reach out to you?
Sure. It's bill@cogswell.com. So COGS-WELL.com, bill@cogswell.com. And if you forget that one, then just Google Bill and Cogs, and I'll pop up somewhere.
Excellent, Bill. I think you're the only person that I know that smiles when talking about inventory. So I know you're certifiably insane, but in all the best ways. So we're going to connect for the part 2 of this, and I hope you have a fantastic day, Bill. Thanks for joining the podcast.
Thank you very much. I sincerely appreciate it. Always a pleasure.
Thank you, Bill. I'll talk to you soon, my friend.
All righty.
86 Reason Podcast was brought to you by Over Easy Office, outsourced bookkeeping solution.